right. What did you do? You dirty dog.
We need to be clear-eyed about the seriousness of these incidents. Indeed, several of the individuals at Coots have strong ties to a far-right extreme organization with leaders who are in Ottawa. We're talking about a group that is organized, agile, knowledgeable, and driven by an extremist ideology where might makes right.
Welcome back, everybody, to another Plaid Army stream. And today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Jared Taylor. How are you, sir?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me on your program.
Well, thank you for being here. And now imagine my shock here when I Wikipedia'd your name to find out more about you, and I find out that you're a Japanese man.
It's a very reliable source, Derek. Wikipedia is the best.
Well, but Wikipedia is very reliable in the sense that they think that even if you're a potato, if you're planted in a carrot patch, you grow up and you're a carrot. Yeah. That's what everybody thinks about third worlders moving to Canada or the United States. You become a Canadian. So yeah, that's right. I am a carrot who grew up in the potato patch.
How long did you spend in Japan?
I lived in Japan until I was 16 years old. I was made in Japan back in the days when made in Japan meant junk. But I somehow survived that. Yeah.
So I can safely assume you're fluent in Japanese then?
That is true. I used to make a living speaking Japanese, believe it or not. Yes, even round eyes like me can speak Japanese. People think Japanese is terrible, difficult language, but there are 100 million Japanese who speak it. You go to Japan, even little children speak it. How hard can it be? Yeah.
True.
Good comparison. Okay. So for the viewers at home, I thought it would be a good idea for you to describe. We know that you are the founder and editor of American Renaissance.
Yes.
So I thought it would be good to work backwards in a way to say, what would America look like if American Renaissance was completely successful? And then we'll find out how you would go about that.
Oh, boy. Well, the first question is much easier to answer than the second. The United States that I want and that so many white people want is the one that was envisaged by the American founders. As you all probably know, when the United States was first established and the very first Congress of the United States met in 1789, it had to figure out a lot of basic things. And one of the most fundamental things that it had to figure out was who was going to be an American, who was going to be a citizen. And they reserved that right to free white persons of good character. They took it for granted that the United States was going to be an outpost of Europe. And when Thomas Jefferson talked about the future not only of North America and South America, he said that these 13 colonies are going to be the nest from which both continents are to be peopled, and there will be neither blot nor mixture on that surface. He had the idea that the whole hemisphere was going to be full of Europeans. Well, that didn't happen, obviously. And now, if you were to ask me, what is the America that I would want? It would be ideal to return to that vision of the founders. Now, obviously, in the United States today, there are many people who are not Europeans, and some of them we brought over by force from Africa. And others we stupidly let in because of an immigration policy that your country, Canada, unfortunately has copied, whereby all these people who cannot be Canadians, who cannot be Americans, are welcomed into the United States and Canada as if, as I say, you could be a tomato and you can grow up in the onion patch and be an onion. So I've probably gone on too long answering your question, but I want a United States that is overwhelmingly white, European, with the intention of remaining that way forever. Now, if we can't get the whole country back, then I think we will have to settle for a part of it. But that is my desire. White people in the United States learn they deserve to be in a country where young children grow up and go to public school without being told that they are dirt. I mean, that's the least that you can ask for. but that would be a radical transformation of the United States today.
And I guess the second part of that question would be, how would that radical transformation take place?
And that's the tough part. I mean, we could all dream about what we would like. I mean, we could all dream, well, it'd be great if it would only rain beer tomorrow. Well, it's not going to rain beer. But returning to some kind of racially conscious America, or at least a part of it, is not an impossibility. And I will tell you, one of the great things about having been involved in trying to increase the racial consciousness of white people for as long as I've been doing it, that's 35 years, believe it or not, 35 years. One of the great things is to see so many young people coming up, excuse me, with very sensible attitudes. I can't tell you how often I meet people who are not even 25, and they know more. They have a deeper understanding about the demographic challenges, the future, what race does, why it's important. They have a better understanding of all those things at age 25 than I had when I was maybe 45. And so that is a great thing. More and more white Americans, and not just Americans, but Europeans, are all recognizing that we as whites, we have the right to be us, and only we can be us. And unless we have nations that reflect those values, then we are on the march to extinction. Now, so how do we get to what we want? At the very least, I would say things will not go our way unless more people agree with us. And at the current time, there are millions and millions and tens of millions, and alas, you could even say probably hundreds of millions of white people who have been bamboozled and have been intimidated to the point where they think that the slightest step towards preserving our integrity as a people and preserving our culture is somehow immoral. So the first step is to get them to get over those moral scruples. After that, then any number of things can happen. But the most important thing is to get a message out to white people for them to realize that there's nothing more natural, normal, and healthy than to want their people to survive and flourish. That's the first step.
Wow, that was quite the answer.
Well, I tend to go on and on. You need to stop me if I jabber too much.
No, it was okay. I was watching interviews of yourself earlier today, and you've talked to quite a few rabid leftists. And I have to say, your ability to stay composed and measured while in the face of such rabid leftists is admirable.
Well, you don't win any points by losing your cool or losing your temper. Somehow I managed to learn that. There you go.
Throw at everything I've ever done. Just kidding. Sorry.
And I suppose it's because I was once upon a time a lefty. I was a pretty serious lefty. It's almost embarrassing to admit just how much of a lefty I was. And so I know to a large degree how they think. And in a way, I'm almost sympathetic. When you talk to a rabid lefty about these things, all he has ever heard are these silly slogans about diversity is our strength and white people have all this unearned privilege. And so when you start poking holes in those assertions, when it turns out you know a whole lot more about these things than they do, they get upset. And I almost feel sorry for them. But the other thing is, I think it is wrong to act in a triumphalist way over liberals. We can't act as though, even if we are crushing them beneath the wheels of our chariots, it's not a good idea to boast and brag, because ultimately it goes back to the first point I made. Our ideas can prevail only when more people agree with them. And alas, so many of the people that we have to convert are our own erring, misguided brothers and sisters, and we have to approach them in that spirit rather than treating them as implacable enemies. But no, losing your temper, losing your cool, I don't think anybody ever gained points that way. If you're in a fight, of course, let that adrenaline pump, slug that guy as hard as you can. But in a debate, you don't win any points by losing control.
Oh, it's funny how that works, isn't it? Because the emotional response will probably travel further through reshares and clicks and getting people to watch it, but the more measured response actually gets more results.
Well, part of it is just we all have our own personalities and our own natures. And I have never really been one to fly off the handle. I grew up in a family in which people were pretty calm. And you could disagree quite vehemently, but you didn't lose your temper, you didn't shout. And that to me always seemed like a sign you've lost the argument when you start shouting. You've lost the argument when you start calling people names. And that's just my temperament, and I think it's been effective so far. Other people have different approaches. And it's the way I feel about arriving at an understanding of race. There are many, many different ways to come to it. Some people come to it through study of race and IQ. Some people come to it through in their own experience of people of other races. Some people come through it by looking at history and the history of different peoples. There are many, many different ways to come, and there are many, many different ways to make this point to get our arguments across. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Everybody has a role to play.
Yeah, I watched you have to do that with big names too, like Cenk Uygur and Queen Latifah. I guess you were doing quite a bit of national television and allowed to be on national TV at the time.
That was a curious thing. When Donald Trump ran for president the first time around, that is when I had my most national television exposure. And I think I made the most of it. But you see, the media got themselves into a terrible bind. They discovered early on that I was a Trump supporter. And they decided that one way to hurt Donald Trump was to say, okay, look at this loathsome insect, Jared Taylor. He has these horrible, horrible views, and he supports Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump must agree with him. And the media created this Frankenstein monster of a Donald Trump who's a white supremacist, probably a secret admirer of Hitler. And then when he got elected, they were stuck with this image, and they couldn't very well change their tune. But yes, I think it was a very underhanded attempt to try to discredit Donald Trump, as if Donald Trump even knew my name with what I thought about anything. But yes, as a result, I got a lot of attention, and I think I used it effectively. But those days are gone now. I think the media have realized that the more they give me an opportunity to talk, the unfortunate result is the more people find that what I have to say is entirely reasonable and persuasive. So the best thing to do is to take away the microphone.
At the very least, it's different from anything they've heard, in quite some time. If they're dedicated or focused mainstream media, like they're just CNN watchers, or they're people that just watch whatever's on TV, and then they're exposed to something that is radically outside what they're normally used to hearing, and that can sometimes be enough to just really shake something loose for people. So that ultimately is I agree, it would probably backfire. Well,
it's a little bit like the way Charles Murray has been treated. Charles Murray, of course, wrote a remarkable book called The Bell Curve in 1994. His co-author was Richard Herrnstein. And they made some very, very important and even common sense observations about the importance of IQ, the heritability of intelligence, and the fact that different racial groups have different average IQs. Well, the media went crazy about this, absolutely crazy. For 6 months, it was a total firestorm. And then, when more recently, Charles Murray wrote a book on a similar subject. It's called Facing Reality. It was about how the United States had better face up to two really important facts. And the two he had in mind were racial differences in IQ, which are fundamental to understanding any multiracial society. And the other is the high, absolutely, almost in some cases, unbelievable and undeniable rates of crime by Blacks. He says these are two realities America has to face. It was a very clearly written book, very persuasive. The media ignored it, despite the fact that Charles Murray, he is a recognized scholar. Nobody could have put the case as reasonably and as persuasively as he did. But the big media recognized, I think, that they'd made a mistake back in 1994 when they had screamed blue murder about this horrible racist. So they decided just to ignore him. And that is one of the great powers of legacy media, is the power to ignore. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why what people like you are doing is so important. You can break through to a certain segment of the audience that big media had got locked up tight. It was absolutely locked up and double padlocked. But people like you are getting through to people, and that is one of the great things that the internet has given us.
We have noticed a change with the freedom of reach, I suppose, with these different platforms. Jeremy's suffered through it. I've suffered through it. There is still a bit of a, what would you call it, compartmentalization of these ideas that is still available for them. And I guess Elon buying Twitter has helped, but seeing his views recently being exposed to the public or whatnot, do you feel like Twitter will still be an option by the end of Trump's presidency?
Oh, I don't think that Elon Musk is going to, sell it or reinstitute censorship of the kind that was common under his predecessor, Jack Dorsey. So I think in that sense, it will still be an option. Now, it is true that Elon Musk has done some very disappointing things. You all are probably very well aware of the controversy that he kicked up when he talked about how wonderful this H-1B visa program was for the United States. He acted as though this was really just a tiny number of super geniuses that the United States brings into the country to work out so we can be tech geniuses. No, it is scab labor. It's a way to bring mostly Indians into the United States of America, put them on a track to citizenship, and pay them slave wages so they can undercut American tech workers. It's really a very bad program. So one thing I think we have to understand about Elon Musk, he does not have the kind of racial consciousness that I think must be widespread in order for Europeans to survive culturally and as distinct people. He doesn't have that understanding. I do think, though, that he does have a respect for freedom of speech. He calls himself a free speech absolutist. Well, I wouldn't quite call him that. No. And as you know, when he was roundly criticized, given a deserved hiding over this whole question of H-1B visas, then he started taking away people's privileges. I thought that was so childish and petty. He can dish it out, but he can't take it. So I was very disappointed in that. But on the whole, I think he has been a great force for good. And throughout my career as a white advocate, I have been happy for people to say the things they're willing to say, and I don't like to reproach them for the things they are unwilling to say. I think we are better off being happy about the things people are willing to do rather than criticizing them constantly about what they're unwilling to do.
Good point.
But in what way would you say that Twitter would cease to be an option? Do you think Elon Musk is going to go back and start censoring people, or hire 10,000 people to be truth adjudicators on his platform?
I don't know. I think it's an evolution that we're still yet to see, because we expected a lot out of Trump's original presidency that we didn't get to see, and things started to change. So I don't know if Elon would still be in that. You know, he's in the realm of being influenced, I think, still.
Well, you're certainly right about that. Sometimes he will make pronouncements that seem very ill-considered to me, and you wonder, gosh, here's a very smart guy. Did he really think about what he was saying? But we will see. Now, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, I thought his first term was very disappointing in many ways. But it seems to me he's had 4 years out of office to think about what he did wrong, or at the very least, he's got people around him who have thought very hard about what he might have done wrong when he had the chance the first time around. And I am very impressed by the way he has come roaring back. I think he has absolutely overwhelmed the opposition with a kind of shock and awe campaign of executive orders and various changes. Somebody around him, some number of people, no doubt, around him, have looked through the kinds of things that you can change through executive order. And boy, they have dug up a lot of them. And Donald Trump has just buried his opponents in a blizzard of far-reaching orders that I think are some of the best things I've seen in a long time in the American political scene.
Yeah, if you ask me, he shocked and awe our prime minister into resigning.
Now,
That was me, Derek. That was, come on. Credit for that. You can't have all of it.
Seriously, do you think that had something to do with it? I mean, I don't follow Canadian politics the way I should, but the fact that Donald Trump was elected, was that sort of the writing on the wall for him? He says, gosh, people like me, we're past our sell-by date?
I do think it has something to do with it because they're stepping away quickly. We're not just seeing it with the prime minister. We're now seeing it with the premier of Ontario as well. And I feel like these guys don't want to be left holding the bag for some reason.
They know which way the wind is blowing, and they're just, going to try to salvage. I mean, they change their stripes and colors and positions as the seasons change. What's popular today, I would say if it was, for whatever reason, it was popular to eat children, every politician alive would be like, I eat 5 children a day. Personally, they would just be all about it. They're professional liars. You can't believe it. They know which way the wind is blowing, whether it was Trump or somebody else. Trudeau was finished regardless. Pretty much after the trucker convoy, it was the end of his career. I mean, it was just a totally over the top, insane level of overreach and overstep and disrespect to his city. Like, it was just a fatal, it's like taking a chest shot from a very large caliber rifle, and you don't die right away maybe, but you're not coming back from this. And that just has kind of been the case. And he's going to lose to a landslide of the conservatives, who are just liberals with blue trim instead of red. They're just as bad in many, many ways, and they could have a potato or a carrot or something in charge, and it wouldn't matter. They're not being elected on the strength of their policies or how popular they are. They're being elected because they hate this guy so much that they would elect anything, or a fish, anything you could imagine would be sufficient at this point, which is so dangerous, in a lot of ways, because you don't know what you're getting. And it's not that Trudeau doesn't obviously have to, he's terrible, but what are we getting? They don't care. They just look past it. They're not interested. It's what could possibly be worse. Well, Trudeau came in because the last guy we had to get out, the conservative leader, was Stephen Harper. We had enough of him, and he had to go, and no more. We can't have any more of this tyrannical craziness, selling everything to the Chinese. He's mass immigrating everybody into Canada, and the Liberals were going to fix everything. And 10 years down the road, here we are again in the same place. But
well, I understand that according to opinion polls, more Canadians than ever are saying there's been too much immigration. And this is a very good thing to see. The fact is, though, wherever you go, wherever you find European peoples, whether it's in Europe or Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia, people say too much immigration. We've been saying this for 50 years, certainly in the United States, and nothing ever happens. Britain is probably the worst example of this. And what happens is somebody will come in and sort of make promising noises about, well, yeah, maybe there's too much immigration. They get into office, and then they don't do anything. Again, the conservatives in Britain, the Tories, they deserve to be pitched out, but not so that Labour could come in. And I think what we have a real problem in the United States. We have this two-party system. And so somebody with different ideas really has to, in effect, take over one of the existing parties. Europeans have all these different parties, and sometimes you can actually vote for a party that seems to be carrying a nationalist flag. In Canada, you have more than 2 parties, and I'm hoping that perhaps someone, I mean, as you say, all of these people want to be reelected. All these people want to be popular. Is there any hope that your so-called conservatives are going to lick their fingers, put it up to the wind, and see which way things are blowing, and maybe do something about all this mass immigration into Canada?
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if something's happening with the licking of wherever they're putting it. I don't know what images or messages they're getting.
Putting it someplace else. Yeah,
I can think of some ideas. It's actually funny enough. It's actually the Liberals that are taking the charge on. Yeah, there's too much immigration. They're talking about having a moratorium and reducing numbers. And that's all coming from them. They're beating the conservatives to the punch on everything. They're just better at it. It's not that they're sincere, that they care. I think it's just the experience and ability level, skill level of the the showrunners, as it were, of that party are just better than the conservatives in every way. And they're probably, I mean, they're going to lose, but I wouldn't discount them entirely. You never know. I mean, they've got money and they've got smart people. They could pull something out, but I think it's for sure it's going to be locked in that the conservatives are going to win. And I think they're going to do a lot more of the same. And they don't really have a lot of answers. For example, a lot of their leadership are Indians. One of the deputy leaders is an Indian man, and he wears the like a Sikh Indian, so it's not even he's culturally, visually, not us. They're speaking Punjabi and Hindi in the House of Commons, which is outrageous. It's neither of we have two official languages, and that's not one of them.
No.
So who are you talking to? You're not talking to Canadians, obviously, because we don't. And that's just a couple. There's numerous examples of this. So what are they going to do? The number one issue is going to be Canadians are going to say, look, what's with all the Indians? It's already completely out of control, and they're going to complain to the government, who is full of Indians. Like they have nowhere to go. So I'm interested to see what happens. Like, I don't know what they're going to do. They're kind of in a corner here. I don't know. I think what they'll do is try to just pass more hate legislation to stop us from mentioning or talking about any of this. They'll say it's xenophobic, it's anti, all the usual. That's probably what they'll do. That will backfire. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, let's hope it backfires. I mean, it might not backfire. The fact is, censorship, if you really are vigorous about it, you can shut up a lot of people. And that is a fear we actually have to live with. You'd think that after having gone through the Cold War and having jeered at the Soviets and Eastern Europeans for all their censorship, that we would have some understanding of the importance of free speech. And in a way, I think what we have in North America is even worse, because in Eastern Europe, they knew that behind the TV announcer was a commissar, a guy with a peaked cap with a red star on it. This one, we don't have outright government censorship. We have these private companies that do their job for them, which makes it even more insidious. But at the same time, I think it's entirely possible that the Europeans, for example, they're so upset at Elon Musk that they may insist that X be blocked in Europe. And that kind of thing could happen. Now, I don't know to what extent the Canadians would be willing to block X or anything that they think is undermining their multicultural paradise. But censorship is a real problem. And who knows? I hope it backfires, as you say. But I guess the one thing that I would add, one perspective that I think is important to have, is that as we saw in the United States, with this most recent election of Donald Trump, I didn't think he was going to win, by the way. I thought he was going to lose. I thought Kamala, she's young. She is a BIPOC, that is to say, a person of color, a woman of color. She's the future. He's the past. She's young. He's old. I thought, gosh, this half Hindu is just going to sweep into the White House. And it didn't happen. And it happened because millions of Americans were prepared to cock a snook, or produce a third finger, if you prefer, to the massed ranks of every institution in the United States. Everybody at the head table was telling them, this guy is a fascist, this guy's a Nazi. And they said, sorry, we're voting for him anyway. So I don't know. There are things that can be done through electoral politics, and perhaps there'll be some kind of breakthrough in Canada. I was very encouraged to see, I guess it was just today or yesterday, that in Great Britain, the Reform Party, Nigel Farage, it is polling number one as to who you would vote for if a general election in Britain were to be held today, followed by the Conservatives, and then number three was Keir Starmer's Labour Party. So who knows? The winds are blowing in a particular way. And certainly, I think it'll be very interesting to see in February how the German elections come out. How will the AfD do? I mean, I know it is very, very frustrating to be constrained by these ridiculous political parties we have, certainly in Canada and the United States, but things are moving. Things are moving in a way that I find as encouraging as anything I've seen in all 35 years of my trying to be an advocate for our people.
Let me ask a question there. With democracy is supposed to be the ideology that we live under, right? But in Canada, we've had proof with the biggest petitions in Canadian history get ignored. The biggest protests in Canadian history get ignored. And an example from your country would be the results of the 2020 election. Do you still believe in the voting system? As
what I would say is this: it's all we've got for now, unless you want to step completely out of the system. And certainly on the air, I would never suggest doing so. It's all we've got. We have got to do our best within that system, certainly for now. And I think what we had in the United States is a remarkable example of something that can be accomplished. Now, the problem is, in Germany, we have the most spectacular examples of hypocrisy about democracy. The German Constitution guarantees what they call a liberal democracy. And at first, I thought those terms meant only the kind of mechanisms of government. We have a liberal method whereby the people speak their voice. I'm beginning to understand it doesn't mean that for the Germans. It means democracy has got to produce a certain political point of view. And that is why they have this organization, this sort of secret police that's supposed to be protecting the Constitution, that is considering the idea of taking the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the number 2 party in most of the country, and perhaps trying to ban it because it's anti-democratic, because it's too successful. What could be more pathetically, disgustingly hypocritical than that, than to say, yes, 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 we respect the voice of the people, but only when they agree with us. So I think that if we had a democracy that worked, if the people of practically every traditionally white country had a genuine one man, one vote option to absolutely halt non-white immigration, and even to try to engage in measures to return whites to the majority they once were, I think there'd be a good chance that those would pass. But our democracy is thwarted at every stage. In fact, in the United States, to me, it's comical the way people like Barack Obama will talk about our democracy. And he will say the internet is the greatest threat there is to our democracy. How come, Barack? Because people have an actual chance to speak their minds. And that he can't have, because I'm quite convinced that when white people really have a chance to speak their minds, they're increasingly going to say things that the head table does not want to hear. But again, this is the system in which we have to work. And I think, we can talk about alternatives on some other occasion.
Well, the democracy we hold here in Canada, they've only given us really 2 options that we can look at, the Conservatives and the Liberals.
Right.
But both of them have signed us on to these international bureaucracies like the UN Global Compact on Migration. I don't know if you're aware of what the Century Initiative is.
No, I don't. Is that a Canadian initiative of some kind?
It is. It's the NGO that is focused on making Canada's population 100 million by the year 2100.
Oh, good grief.
And if anybody knows our population, we're at 41 million.
100 million.
Well, just to paint how crazy it is, like when I graduated high school in 2004, and at that time Canada had 30 million people in it, 31 million people. Now it has 41 or 42 million. So 20%, 25% of the country got here in the last 20 years. Like that, and they're not like the overwhelming majority of them. So it's changed dramatically just in 10, 20 years. It's been in like, I was talking about this with Morgan, my girlfriend, last night, and it was like, it's painful to try and remember and hold on to the past a little bit. And you have to, or you'll forget about that. And then they win, like this is what we used to have. It's what's been taken, what we've lost. But if you think about it too much, you'll go crazy. So it's this kind of difficult balancing act to try and keep your grip on foundation in reality, but not so much so that because it can be overwhelming. But I did have a question, because you said that, as you're into your 40s, it sounded like, until before you started to become an activist or became interested in any of this kind of stuff. What was it? It's kind of a 2-part question, because I think I know the answer, but I'm curious to hear what you think about it. First, like, what was it that happened to you? Was it a personal experience? Was it something that happened, or was it just a general coalescing of fact, or something that made you interested in this? And
can I just maybe take a stab at it? I would think a white guy growing up in Japan might be aware of what race is.
That's what everybody guesses, and it's a very good guess. It should have had an impact, but I cast my mind back to my childhood, to my adolescence, and I have to tell you, I don't think it had any impact at all. It's only later when I arrived at a better understanding of race that I realized just how wonderful Japan is and was, and why it was so wonderful. It's full of Japanese and hardly anybody else. And of course, it has this terrible population problem. So they're considering importing people, but they instinctively don't want to do that. But they don't want the last Japanese to disappear in the next 100 years either. It's a terrible problem. In any case, you would think that would have made a difference on the young Jared Taylor. Well, it didn't. I was brought up by liberal parents. I sort of absorbed what the liberalism there was around me. I think in the 1960s, 1970s, even 1980s, for the most part in the United States, just by breathing the air, chances are you are going to become a liberal. And so it was a gradual process whereby I cast off those liberal illusions. And I must tell you, I hesitated to do it because in those days, I think, well, certainly with the election of Donald Trump, people have just, their whole idea of the world and who's on the right side of history, all of this has been just knocked into a cocked hat. But certainly in the 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s, certainly, people had the idea that liberalism was the natural march of history, that being on the right side of history meant going left, always constantly moving left. And certainly, back when I first started in this business, to abandon the leftward march gave you a feeling of loneliness, gave you a feeling of being out of step. And that was something that I think most people, and I think it's still the case, most people don't want to be out of step. We are herd animals after all.
So
and we like to think that, I beg your pardon?
It's the number one fear, they say, is to be socially to be cast out and ostracized and sent away, to be, live on your own. So that's they leverage that very effectively. They did it during COVID, and so it's sorry.
Exactly right. And at a time when the entire United States, and in some respects the entire world, was moving leftward, certainly on questions of race, to say, well, hold on, we have been marching down the road to perdition for 70 years. Our rulers are misguided. They are driving us off a cliff. This is a very sobering realization, and people don't want to arrive at such a pessimistic conclusion, especially when it seems like everything is going the wrong way. So that was part of my dilemma as well. It took a certain amount of struggle to get over it. Now, there is one story I tell, and as I look back, there were a number of channel markers, if you will, buoys that perhaps guided me back to some sort of safe harbor. And one was an experience I had when I was 19 years old, and I was vagabonding around West Africa. I've told this story before, so some of your viewers are going to say, okay, Taylor's telling this old story again. But
I've never heard it.
You've never heard it. All right.
I don't think so.
Here it comes. I had spent a fair amount of time in Ivory Coast. And at the time, Ivory Coast was doing very well. It was doing very well, partly because it had been, it was being run in an indirect sort of way by the French. But the streets were paved.
This is the 60s or?
Excuse me?
What year? This is the 60s?
This is 1970.
Okay.
That's the exact time.
Okay.
And people were relatively well dressed. And in fact, people calling Ivory Coast the Japan of West Africa, of all things. Nobody calls it that anymore. But it was doing relatively well. And then I crossed the border into Liberia. Well, as you know, Liberia was a country that was founded by manumitted American slaves. And by contrast to Ivory Coast, it was a wreck. Well, it still is a wreck by just about anybody's standards. The roads were full of potholes that could eat an elephant. The buildings were tumbled down. People were dressed in rags. It was just a startling contrast. And at the time, I was a young guy. And whenever I got to a new country, I would go to the capital city and go to the university and meet other young people. Because university students, no matter where you go, they're going to have more on the ball than just some peasant who's pounding millet in a wooden mortar and pestle. And I met this young guy. He seemed pretty much on the ball. And I said, I don't mean to be rude, but I just came from Ivory Coast. And it's such a contrast. Why is Liberia such a wreck? He says, it's easy to answer that question. We did not have the benefit of being colonized by white people. Now, at the time, I still had this idea that the colonial enterprise was an exploitative one, and it was undertaken primarily to enrich the mother country, that it had all these horrible effects on the colonies. But for this guy, it was very simple. Ivory Coast was helped out, guided, even governed by white people. We have always been governed by black people, and that explains it. And that was a very jarring and surprising thing. In 1970, I don't think you would have found many people in the United States who have said that. And I did not immediately turn on a dime, but that rattled around in my brain for a long time. So that's one experience that I can point to. But it was a gradual accumulation, partly from studying European history and just world history, understanding economics. No, I'm sorry to say that unlike so many young people today who have tumbled to the reality of race much earlier than I did, it was a gradual and bumpy, and in some respects, a disagreeable process.
That's similar to, I mean, at a younger age, obviously, but I was in the Army for a long time, so I was very insulated. I didn't have any, I wasn't even attached to the world at all, really, in any real sense, until, after I got out and started making videos, and I ran into this guy. And it was, again, kind of a gradual process of just kind of figuring things out and trying to look at them honestly and earnestly and really come to a conclusion that makes sense. Like a key must open the lock, otherwise it's, or it's like having a fire extinguisher that doesn't work. These are the kinds of ideas that we're selling people. It's like when I apply them to reality, they don't make any sense. Nothing makes sense. And then there's other people that are saying, well, this is why. And then I take that and I do that math. I go, oh, well, that actually does work. That does make sense. And their counter argument is, well, we'll just censor you. Like, okay, well, then he's probably
exactly.
It's kind of what happened. But the second part of my question was why, because you mentioned earlier, a lot more young people, and that is happening. Younger people are dramatically more aware to this than certainly when I was a kid. But it does seem to be accelerating. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's a combination of access to information and the internet and so on that's so prevalent? Plus, because when I was a kid in the 90s, there was everybody was, it was a 99% white. I mean, I'm from the East Coast of Nova Scotia. So unless you're in one of the big cities in Ontario or out West, I never even saw an Indian man. And my experience with Indians was Apu on The Simpsons until I was like 29 years old. Like I'd never even encountered one, or well, I mean, they probably had overseas or something, but you know what I mean? Like that was kind of just our concept of it just didn't exist. There was nothing really to bet. That's not the case anymore. So I wonder if it's a mixture of access to information, plus it's right there. Like they're going to school with it. They're riding the bus with it. They're going to, dealing with it when we didn't. It was just on television, if it existed at all, in a fantasy world. So I'm just curious what you think about that.
Well, I think you're absolutely right on both counts. One is the collision with reality. I mean, you can be told that the sky is green hundreds and hundreds of times, but if every time you get up in the morning, it's blue, eventually you're going to realize that these people telling you it's green are wrong. And at the same time, when I was first trying to study dissident ideas about race, the only way to do that would be to write off to obscure P.O. boxes in Olathe, Kansas, or hunt around in the dusty corners of university libraries for these forbidden texts. Now, a very coherent view of race as a biological concept, race as a governing factor in civilization, and the importance of racial differences in IQ, all of these things are available with just a few mouse clicks. Now, there's been a terrible attempt to censor that, but it's like whack-a-mole. It just keeps popping up in different places. You were probably kicked off of YouTube, maybe never attempted to be on YouTube, but there are other places that you can go. And all of this is deeply distressing to the people who want to keep us in ignorance. So, yes, it is a huge, huge, huge and very encouraging difference.
Would you say that the seeing the youth getting into these topics has given you a rejuvenation into your own spirit of these topics? Or
heavens.
More hope?
Oh, gosh, yes. I will tell you, as I say, I've been in this for 35 years. And I would say for the first, 15, I thought really all I might be doing was just creating a record so that when some Chinese scholar was putting together the great Chinese World Encyclopedia, and it came to the chapter on the white man, who by then is just some insignificant nothing. And he's writing the chapter on, well, what happened to the white man? that some enterprising scholar might realize that not every one of us was a coward and a fool. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm not just making a record. Things are going to change. They may not change to my liking within my lifetime, but I think now the genie's out of the bottle. There are too many people who understand, too many people who realize what's at stake. And all of this cannot be put back underground the way it was. Things are going to change. Now, how that happens and whether it will be happening peacefully and agreeably, I don't know. But things are definitely going to change. Now, you said the reality of people. You grew up in this insulated white world, and you encountered a non-white world. Well, there was a fellow named Robert Patterson. He was an American active in the 1960s, 70s. He started something called the Citizens Council. He said there is a sure cure for integration fever, and that's a stiff dose of Negroes. Well, he actually didn't use the word Negroes, but there is no question that when people actually encounter the reality of race and it doesn't conform to what they're told, it is remarkable to me for how long they can actually disbelieve their lying eyes, as people put it, but eventually they tumble to the fact that, no, there are differences and I don't like them. So, unfortunately, if it requires all the white people in the world having a disagreeable experience with an Indian or an African or a Muslim, then it'll never happen. We have to learn from the experiences of others, not just from the experiences of ourselves. But I think this is happening at a very, very encouragingly high rate all around the world, all around the white world.
Nope. I think that might be a good chance to ask you about the word negritude. Negritude. I heard this in one of your interviews, and I thought that was clever.
Well, negritude, actually, it is a word that was invented by a number of French-speaking Africans. And it comes from the French word nègre, which is traditionally, well, it started off being a perfectly normal term, like Negro, but it then became considered an insult. So they said, okay, we're going to take this word that is used to insult us, or is increasingly used to insult us, and we're going to make it a matter of pride. It strikes me as something analogous to the way homosexuals have taken the word queer. And they say, well, yes, we're going to adopt this word. Yes, we are queer, damn it. Of course, we're not allowed to call them queer. They can call them queer, call themselves queers, but we're not supposed to use that word. So
that's our word.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We own that word.
Yeah, we did that here, Derek and I, for years ago, because they would do the media hit pieces and stuff and say, well, these people are all just bigots. It was like, good. And that's what we'll call each other. What up, bigot? You know, what's up, my bigot? You know, they call themselves that. It's like, it's just a word. It doesn't mean, and when you look it up, it means you're intolerant of other views. Right. Which is like, well, that could be anyone. I'm very intolerant of the view of people that think, pedophilia should be legal. I disagree very aggressively on that. I guess I'm a bigot. There's a million things. Or do you want your city to be totally Islamified? No, you're a bigot. So it's a stupid, silly. It just takes the power out of it, which we've seen other groups of people do. So I thought,
exactly right.
Own the word then.
And in fact, anyone who calls you or me or any of us on this program a bigot is in fact admitting that he or she is a bigot.
Has to be.
They're saying, shut up,
right.
Because they're saying we don't like it. It's an intolerance of the opinions of others. But like so many words, that's been co-opted by the left, and it's one that they use almost exclusively for people who talk sense about race. But anyway, back to negritude. The guy who became the first president of independent Senegal, Leopold Senghor, he was one of the promoters of negritude. Likewise, I believe it was a Caribbean black poet by the name of Aimé Césaire. They said, okay, we're going to talk about negritude and we're going to make it a positive thing, absolutely positive. Sort of like black is beautiful,
Mm.
of course, if you have to shout about how beautiful black is, that does make you wonder, well, why do they have to shout so much about it? You know? Nobody has to harangue us into thinking that a sunset is beautiful or a mountain valley is beautiful. But in any case, they have to shout about black is beautiful. Well, they're going to say negritude is a positive characteristic. Well, they never were very good about defining just what negritude was. But I have taken that word and I have adapted it to mean what we find to be unique about blacks. And I just leave it at that. So it's up to you. You can fill in the blanks. Whatever you feel is unique about black, that is the embodiment of their negritude. And I remember there was a line from Leopold Senghor, president of Senegal. He said, the black man must not deny his negritude any more than the tiger would deny his tigritude, Well, great. That's wonderful. Okay. Keep it up, fellas. Keep it up. I don't want you to deny your negritude either. Keep at it. So I've decided to recirculate that word into the English language, where I would concede it's not a familiar term.
Well, if we could say that we've learned anything from negritude, it would be that owning your own slur, there's an advantage to it.
Well, I'm not sure they actually own it in any meaningful way. It's not something that has become some sort of celebration of the African spirit or the black genius. Nobody even talks about negritude. They attempted it. It didn't really work. And I think when homosexuals talk about being queer, does that really change anyone's view as to how wonderful homosexuals are? No, I don't think so. It's failed. And I know that there's some people who are trying to rehabilitate the term racist. You know, I can sort of go either way on that. It seems to me that no matter how one defines it, nobody defines it very successfully. It always implies some kind of moral inferiority. And that's why I consider it a meaningless term, and I would not accept to be called a racist. And
most people are unaware the word itself is only about 85 or 90 years old. It didn't even exist until 1934 or something like that.
That's right.
I think it was a Jewish author's book, I think, called Racism. I think was I think it was Hirsch. Yeah, it was the name of the book was Hirschberg. Okay. Yeah.
You know, yes, it is astonishing. You know, we managed to have black slavery, and we managed to free the slaves, and managed to have Jim Crow and all of that stuff without using the word racism, which now seems so essential to our ordinary discourse. Quite amazing, isn't it? But you see, that is a trick that the left always uses. They will take something that is really a natural phenomenon, like being suspicious of people who are unlike yourself, people who have different religions, different countries, look different, and that is xenophobia. Well, no, it's a perfectly natural expression of preference for people who are like you.
Everyone does it.
Yes.
That was one of the most interesting things is because when I kind of started coming down this, because again, you're in this insulated world and you're taught that this is how everyone is. And it turns out, no, everyone's racist except you, or you're not allowed to be. It's like,
exactly.
Well, it's funny, the term that they use at the end of that word ist, but if you were a scientist, you were the top of your field, or an archaeologist. So a racist is derogatory, but
but
it's an amazing hijacking.
Yes, an Islamicist is not. You know, those people are just fine. But people talking about sexist. If you notice that men and women are different, you know, you're not supposed to notice that. That makes you a sexist. Or I don't know, a homophobe. This idea that we're afraid of people who are different. None of these words is new, because they're trying to pathologize a perfectly natural and normal recognition of distinctions. And I don't know, fat phobia and all this stuff. Fat is beautiful. No, fat's not beautiful. Fat is not beautiful. It's unattractive and it's unhealthy. And the idea that we're supposed to think these people are all lovely and beautiful, I'm still shocked when I go into a store and I see these pictures of models, and they're all 40, 50, 60 pounds overweight. Come on, who are they trying to kid about that?
And on the one hand, I mean, I understand what they're trying to do. It's like, we've created a culture that is averse to confrontation or any kind of like they basically equated any negative feeling with automatically bad. Right. But I mean, if you go to the gym and really wreck your legs, like, it doesn't feel good. It's not fun, pleasant experience. You're very sore for days and days, but what's happening, you're actually becoming stronger and healthier.
Yes.
So it's not always bad, but we've created this kind of society that is. So it just means everybody must feel good all the time, and this is what it's created. And I tell people, they say, "Well, you're hateful. Why are you picking on fat people?" Because I'm trying to help them. You're apparently like, if someone was addicted to crack cocaine, you're saying that's a beautiful thing, and you're being you, and you're expressing. Like, no, you're hurting yourself, and you're going to die.
Yes.
You're going to get diabetes, and you're going to die. I'm trying to alert you to this horrible, what you're doing to yourself. This is not okay. Well, the TV said it is okay. Well, they're liars, and they don't care about you. And we're the bad guys.
That's an excellent parallel. I never thought of putting it in those terms, but that's like saying, okay, go ahead and drink yourself into a stupor every night. Yeah. That's okay. Eat nothing but sugar on it. That's okay. Go ahead.
It's my authentic self.
Yes. The authentic selves of certain people should be changed to the extent that they can change them. And the idea that it's okay to have all that fat hanging on your body. No, it is something that most people can control, at least to some degree, and to encourage people to be fat, that they're doing them a terrible disservice. It's exactly as you say. I'm going to steal that idea, and I will use it elsewhere.
Feel free. Feel free.
There is a certain power and almost a science to labeling things, isn't there?
Yes.
Once it's labeled, it's got a category, and I can compartmentalize it and put it away and not think about it again because I've labeled it now.
That's right. And that is something that the left at one time, and it lasted for several decades, was very good about labeling people like us. We were hate mongers. We were haters. And once Southern Poverty Law Center or the Anti-Defamation League says, this guy, Jared Taylor, or that guy, Derek, that guy, Jeremy, these guys are haters. What that means is, okay, we don't have to pay attention to a single word they say. And that worked beautifully for a long time. It was really a genius idea to label as haters any white people who wanted their culture and their people to survive. It really was a genius thing. Labeling things is about the most powerful way to legitimize or delegitimize whatever it is you want to legitimize or delegitimize.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say that it's probably worked with you. And I know somebody that it's worked with me was David Duke. I had heard his name. I had so many labels about him, and I just dismissed him all the time until I just left my podcast on going on to the next video and that. And I was washing the dishes, not paying attention. And I'm like,
the algorithm failed that day.
Who's talking? This guy sounds brilliant. And I go over and I'm like, oh, Jesus. And that realization is like, wait a second. I was told for so long that this guy is the antithesis of evil, and all I had to do was give him a chance.
David Duke is a very smart and persuasive guy. There is absolutely no question about that. But all you ever hear about him is former Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. That's all you hear about David Duke. And in most people's minds, their eyes fall completely shut. Their ears become clogged, and they look away, and that's all they need to know about David Duke. And that sort of thing works so brilliantly when you have the power to label. You're absolutely 100% right.
It's the same power, if not shared power, with headlines. Because people don't read the article, they read the headlines. And what's even worse is the fact checkers that they've put out or they've deployed to take care of everybody's truth, I guess you could say. Is that they'll outright disagree with the statement said above, but 2 paragraphs down, they basically say it's true what they said. It's an incredible spell or trick, I guess you could say, that we've all succumbed to.
That's right. And then they wonder why people don't believe the mainstream media. They're perplexed. As I used to put it, people in the news, they will slant everything that they say, and then they will believe what they read in the papers. It's this sort of self-inflicted, continual feed yourself the kind of ignorance you're trying to feed other people. But no, I think it's great. Whenever I see statistics on how few people believe the mainstream media or network television or the New York Times, Washington Post, I am happy.
It is a trick that I've had to learn with my own family, is that I can talk to thousands of people online and they'll trust my word. But if I tell my dad something, because I'm his son, it doesn't matter. So I would actually have to employ somebody to tell my dad what I wanted him to understand, and then he'll tell me the idea. So there's this
Oh.
mental block that he cannot learn from his son. And I think a lot of people have that same mentality.
I think a lot of people do think that young people have nothing to tell them. And on the one hand, I think youth are led by the young. I think young people, if they are themselves young, they will listen to young people. And there really was a phrase during the hippie era, don't trust anyone over 30.
Yeah.
Is that where that
Yeah.
came from? I've never knew where that came from.
Yes, that was from the hippie.
Okay.
Those are the pot
Okay.
smoking, long-haired, headband
Yeah.
wearing hippies with their bell bottom. Don't trust
Okay.
anyone over 30. Yes, that's where that comes from.
Mhm.
And the thing about it is there's a real arrogance of youth. I think young people have a tendency to think that they're the ones who have first discovered sex, or they're the ones who first discovered music that really matters, or they have discovered poetry. There's a real arrogance about that. And it is as you age that many people discover that they're turning into their parents after all.
Yeah.
Partly for genetic reasons, and partly because, looks like mom and dad were right about that. I hate admit it.
Experience does play into it.
Yes.
I have a theory about this.
Yes, please.
Because I've been watching this happen, and that was the example I used. It was the hippie era or that kind of thing, and it's almost like biologically, as a life form, people have like this sort of built-in immune system, like a white blood cell or something. And the nature of young people is to be rebellious and test the fences, as it were, and test the boundaries.
Yes.
And it's like,
right.
if the system is rotten and it can be simply pushed over by a storm of young people just deciding we're not doing it, and it all falls apart, then it should fall apart, because it's clearly is worthless if it can't even contain children. So they have nothing to learn from a system like that, and there's no value in it, so they destroy it. So that's just their instinct is to try and tear it down. Now, if it's a strong system and foundation that's beneficial to them, is benevolent and helpful, they'll challenge it, and then eventually get tired and go, okay, fine. They'll get a job and go to college and everything else. So you grow up essentially and you settle down. But I think that's a natural kind of phenomenon, and now it's starting. They're knocking fences down and wrecking things and punching holes and things. Like you're seeing these, I guess the latest best example would be the Hamas, or not Hamas, the pro-Palestinian demonstrations across universities and stuff with a lot of this. And there's no counter. They go to punch the fence or shake, and it just the argument is like, well, it's magic book, chosen people, it's special, you just leave it alone. There's no, logically, none of this makes any sense to these people. So they're like, that's crazy nonsense. So it's all falling apart, as it should, because that's not a good argument to anybody, and it's their nature to challenge it. So I think it's just, these people are fighting nature itself and trying to contain the human soul in this box. And it's like, it will fun. You think you're smarter than God or the universe, it seems. And that's fun. Good luck with that. You may be on top for 100 years or so, but on a long enough line of, generations, I just don't think it's going to work.
No, you're 100% right. The Roman satirist Juvenal said, you may drive nature out with a pitchfork, but she will always return. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes her a while to return. Mm-hmm. And the whole nature of white people to realize that they have a destiny as white people, that's been part of our nature for 1,000 years. And that has been driven out of us with, even worse than pitchforks, it's been driven out of us by the TV and the media and all of these things, but it's coming back. And I think it must come back. But yes, you're right. I think it must be very confusing to be a Jew in the United States today. For a long time, they figured that, the Holocaust, that's going to protect us from any kind of criticism. We can never be considered as oppressors. Well, no. These days, lefties, it's the lefties who say, not only are you all oppressors, you are uber oppressors. In the Middle East, you're the white man. You are the colonist. And so,
you're doing everything you told us was awful, and you're actively doing it and uploading it to TikTok right now. And I don't know how I'm supposed to reconcile that with my university deed. And then, we'll just send the National Guard in to beat you up or something to prove that you're wrong.
It's a very confusing and disturbing time.
Yeah. Or was it? It was actually, I read there was Mossad or IDF soldiers actually participated in some of the fighting with these university students in America. Like it was a documented. Like some of these guys actually came from Israel. And then that's insane. If this was if this was something to do with Russia, and it came out a bunch of guys in the crowd starting fights and hitting people. Yeah, they were Russians. Russian soldiers. That would be a problem. But anyway.
Yes, indeed. But no. things when you run into reality over and over and over again, eventually, I think even the most blinkered liberal is going to bark his shins. And to me, there are a number of encouraging examples. One is the case of Asheville, North Carolina. I don't suppose either of you have ever been there. It is a pleasant little town in the mountains of North Carolina. It's been liberal for a long time. It's one of these typical yuppie places. You can get holistic dentistry, and
Is this where you're from?
No. I'm not.
I'm trying to guess. I'm trying to guess the accent. It's somewhere between Virginia's and Carolinas, somewhere down there.
Well, that's a pretty good guess. That's a pretty good guess. My father's from North Carolina. My mother's from Kentucky. I wish I still had more of an accent, but when I'm in the South, it comes right back. But in any case, it's this sort of yuppie, hippie-trippy little place. And after St. George Floyd ascended into heaven on May 25th of 2020, very good.
I'm not sure if he was canonized, though. Was he?
He's been represented in bronze statues. That's good enough for America.
Okay.
Someone painted him as a saint on a wall. It might have been Africa. I don't know where it was, but it was struck by lightning and destroyed one day, which was, I thought was hysterical.
That's terrible. God's not on his side after all. Well, in any case, back to hippie happy Asheville. They believe this baloney about how really the problem is not criminals. The problem is the police. It's the presence of police that makes people shoot up drugs and mug you and shoplifting and all of that stuff. So they fired about a third or maybe half of their police force. And of course, you can guess exactly what happened. Well, Asheville, the Ashevilleans, no matter how deluded and bamboozled they'd been during that period in 2020, they realized they made a mistake. And so they apologetically went out and tried to rehire the policemen they'd fired, and they paid them bonuses to come back. And now Asheville is a sadder and wiser place. So there is a certain amount of self-correction that is not out of question. Oddly, there are places like Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon is still going through this process. Yeah. Portland, Oregon is one of these places where even the city fathers, a lot of business owners live in town. It's not a place like, I don't know, Akron, Ohio, or Cleveland, where all the people live outside and there's this sort of dead, mostly black city center and nobody goes in there anymore. Portland's a place where all kind of people go there. And they have decriminalized all the things you should not decriminalize: public defecation, or fornication, or drug taking, camping out, and not even the city fathers really like stepping over some zonked out zombie on the sidewalk on their way to work. And only gradually is it self-correcting there. So some people, it comes to them more naturally and normally than others. Maybe those North Carolinians still have a little bit of gumption of their Southern ancestors. So we'll see. But sometimes liberals can learn.
It's interesting when you look at it in that respect, especially if you're talking about 100 years from now when that same Chinese man comes to dig up your book. They're going to look at these cities like Portland and see people living in tents and be like, how did they ever build these buildings?
Yeah, well, you know what that reminds me? I guess it was, when was it that Napoleon went down to Egypt? I think that was about 1808 or 1808. In any case, they had this really quite remarkable exploration campaign. It was a military campaign, but also an archaeological campaign in Egypt. And they got to the pyramids, and they discovered these Bedouins living at the base of the pyramids who had absolutely no idea what they were, who had put them there, where they had come from. And yes, I can imagine the Chinese coming to America or looking at the ruins of America and finding living amongst these savages who know nothing about who put up the skyscraper.
Who? Mount Rushmore. Who are they? I don't know. They've always been there at this natural rock formation.
Exactly. That's right. Oh, these must be Native Americans.
Probably.
Yes, you're right. But no, I think things are changing. We're not going to degenerate quite to that point.
I hope not, for sure.
It's interesting. I mean, because you're told all, or at least my whole life anyway, you're not so much told implicitly, but kind of subtly through television and media and stuff like this whole idea of like race at all, that it even exists, is just it's just bad. We just don't even acknowledge that's just, so that you kind of have to overcome all of that. But even when I was a kid, I had an interest in DNA, in that idea that there is a foundational, like a scientific, like we can predict by knowing what this genetic code is, like what this is going to be, or what this person will look like, or what, or all these kinds of things. And I would ask my teachers, I said, well, if I have like fat parents, will I be fat? Or would it, or if they were pro athletes, because I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm 14 at this point. I'm, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there was hockey. I was really into hockey. I was a good young Canadian boy. And there's a lot of dynasty like families, like the Stahl brothers, too. The odds of you making it to an elite level like the NHL as brothers is low. And you've got fathers and then sons, and then now there's third generation hockey families now in the NHL. So I'm like, is this just because their dads taught them some secrets, or is there? Well, no, there's a genetic.
It must be how Trudeau got into office, then, right?
Yeah. Well, he has a different set of skills that or like Joe Frazier, famous boxer. His son was a professional fighter. I mean, again, to reach those levels is just unless there's something more going on there, which is I think the DNA is like you are in fact a copy of the people that created you. So I find that fascinating. And then back to this negritude word, which I'd never heard, but it's interesting. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think every race and every people should embrace that, because that's if you're Japanese, you should be proud of and enjoy being Japanese and whoever you are. So it's like the spirit, like why does Europe look like Europe? Why does Japan look like Japan? Why are they these way? Because that's who lives there.
Yes,
it's as simple as that. The spirit of the people is biological. It's like inside their DNA, why they are the way they are, their temperaments and all these kinds of things. And it was a few years ago I came across, it was a Chinese study actually that kind of broke this down. I mean, there was a lot to read, and I was, I'm more of a generalist. I'm not that much of an intellectual. I just pretend, but there was a lot of, summary points and graphs and stuff you could look at. And it actually found that they're, because they say, oh, well, your race difference is only skin deep. And they're like, actually, that's the least different thing. That's the least consequential difference. And the top like 5 or 10 biggest differences, like they were fairly substantial between the races, was like I think it was called like brain tube patterning. And it was how your mind essentially works, and how you process emotions and come up with thoughts, and how you react to different things are different depending on what race of people or what tribe you belong to. And that is like that. I mean, what else do you need? That's I think that's unassailable to me in a lot of points, to at least make the case that like we're all people. Yes, we're all human beings. But a golden retriever is not a Labrador. No. And a crow is not an eagle. And well, they're both birds. They both lay eggs. But I have eyes, and there's differences, and there's different things about them. They're not necessarily one is superior or inferior. They're just different things. They're different life forms. We're all life forms on this earth. So to apply that to the animal kingdom, but it doesn't apply to us. I mean, we're being intellectually dishonest now at this point. I mean, I think, right? Yes, I find that, I think that's maybe making a resurgence. It really struck me when I kind of came upon this, and I was like, that just, again, like that's the key that opens the lock. That +2 + 2, that equals 4. That's the math I can do with my level of education, but there it is. It's 4. Your biological makeup, who you are, it does have a massive, major impact on how you are in the world. It's just, why is a shark a shark? Why do sharks act like that? Because they're sharks. That's the simplest explanation.
No, you're 100% correct about that. And when the human genome was sequenced for the first time, I've forgotten now the name who was the guy, the name of the guy who was in charge of that project. It'll come to me later on. But he boldly announced that now that we know what the DNA patterns of a human being are, we can confidently say that there's no such thing as race. Race is a social construct. And I remember thinking, that is incredibly, preposterously stupid.
We've also deleted all of anthropology at the same time. That's no longer a thing anymore. And
of course. Well, the very concept of race. And there was a period in the United States when people would use the word racialized as black. This person is racialized as black. He wasn't really black, you see, but we have been conditioned into considering him to be black or racialized as white. And I thought, good grief, this is so wrong and so obviously stupid that only very intelligent people could possibly convince themselves that it's true.
They
And
use
this
that word
idea-
here.
Excuse me.
They use racialized Canadians
Racialized,
often up here. They have in the last 4 or 5 years. It's become a big term. And
racialized.
BIPOC, yeah, because
Yes,
during
yes, yes.
the kind of the George Floyd riots of that
Mhm.
summer, because that's how they leveraged the chaos in society. I think the black population of America is 16% or 18%, somewhere in that number, maybe 14.
13,
Um,
14,
in,
yes.
in Canada, it's like 3 or 4%. So it's not enough to really make that kind of, social chaos that's, desired. So they invented BIPOC, which is Black and Indigenous people of color. So it's a long-winded word to say everybody that isn't white over here and everybody else over there. And then now we've got the indigenous natives, which was, I think they're like 10 or 12% of Canada, plus anybody that's black, plus, people of color. So now we're talking 25% of the population. Now we can really create this take a side kind of thing and tear down the statues and rename the schools because of all of that,
Well, just like negritude, I tried to popularize a term, and that was the coming bipocalypse. When you get enough BIPOCs, you're going to bring on the bipocalypse. But it
I'm
hasn't
taking
caught
that
on
one.
yet.
I was going to say, I'll trade you. I'll trade you my crack metaphor for bipocalypse. We'll make it.
Excellent.
taking
A
that for
fair
sure.
trade. A fair trade.
Okay.
No,
Done
but
deal.
the idea, you'll find that the only people who sing this silly song about race being some sort of sociological optical illusion, it's only white people. You never find black people saying they know perfectly well they're black. They've known all their lives. And somehow tell them, oh, no, race, it's not really there. Whoa, brother, whoa, I'm black. Only white people fall for this preposterous nonsense.
It is kind of a weird phenomenon, isn't it? Where race being a social construct, when the actuality is society is a racial construct, and you get a society from people in the same race, and it's only a matter of time before they rediscover, oh, we came up with race. Well, no, you didn't.
The idea is, and this is so crazy, that white people invented the idea of race as an excuse to oppress people who are not white, as if when the Japanese first saw a white man, they thought, oh, this guy looks just like me. That could be Uncle Tanaka.
Yeah.
No, everybody, everywhere, always sees race. As I say, it is so obviously wrong and stupid that it's a wonder anybody can believe it.
Yeah.
Now, these days, you hear it less and less. But, you were talking about DNA and the power of DNA and genetics. I've always said,
it was Jurassic Park. I just realized why it was. It was Jurassic Park, watching as a kid, fascinated, like, how they created the dinosaurs. And I'm like, this whole scientific idea exploded in my head. And now I know what DNA is. They explained it in the movie very well. This is what DNA is. This is how it works. And this is how we can make dinosaurs. So I'm like,
So
okay, then. Now I get it.
You were turned into a wicked racist by watching Jurassic Park. Gosh.
Which coincidentally was a
Hollywood.
Steven Spielberg movie. So that's fine.
Well, people come to wisdom through all sorts of different routes. This is the first time I've heard of someone who came to wisdom through Jurassic Park. But welcome to the Cognoscenti. Yes.
Yeah. That's funny.
Well, gentlemen, as I told you at the outset, I cannot be interesting for more than about an hour. I bet we've been going more than an hour.
Just over.
117.
Just
118.
over. Well, it's getting to be my bedtime. We usually need our beauty sleep.
Understandable. But if I could ask maybe one more question before you go, or maybe two.
Yes.
One would be, what kind of advice would you give for anybody looking for longevity in this field?
You mean as an advocate for white people?
Yes.
Well, the advice that I would give to almost all people who have an incipient racial consciousness, go ahead and get an education, find a wonderful woman, marry her, have children, establish yourself as a human being, as a white man. That is the first thing that is your first obligation, I believe, to your race. I meet so many of these young guys who, I'm the great white warrior, and they're going to thump their chests and they're going to blaze out like a meteor. No. This is going to be a long, hard struggle. This is this is going to be a marathon. So the very first thing is establish yourself in a career, and ideally in a career where you can't be bounced, you can't be doxxed. Some place that you're your own boss, or if you've got the kind of talent, you can be some kind of internet or ex-influencer who can make a living by your wits. These things are possible too. But the idea that you're going to save the white race in the next 10 minutes by doing something crazy, that's utterly, utterly wrong. Now, I understand there's a huge temptation, especially young guys. I mean, ever since you've been in kindergarten, you've been told white people are wicked, your ancestors are wicked, your culture is wicked, you yourself, you are unconsciously wicked. And it's a great desire, once you've thrown off those shackles, to just go in, all guns blazing. No. Be cautious. Establish yourself as a white man first, and then you can find ways to contribute. One way to contribute is make a lot of money. Not everybody is going to be professionally involved in white advocacy, but if you make a lot of money, then you can help the people who are in that business. So think about the future as long-term rather than short-term. That would be my advice.
Very good. And if you don't mind indulging in one more.
Sure.
American Renaissance is your website, and I have been going through all the videos on there to try and get ready for this interview.
Goodness. That was more than you had to do.
Yeah, well, I'd like to be prepared. I would like to make a small suggestion, is that
yes,
with your wisdom being unparalleled in this field, I think it would be beneficial to all of social media and Americans, Canadians alike, if you were to do 1-minute videos with some of the knowledge that you've been spitting out here today. Because I know people's tolerance for long form interviews isn't the same, but those 1-minute snippets, and I even have one ready here. I think it was Barry Weiss that you were talking to at the time. And this clip had gone so viral, and I think it was essential for the talking points of younger white males.
All right.
Play that. It's just a quick clip, but it was so remarkable, I thought.
What you're saying is, somehow, whites were about to choke to death on their own homogeneity when people like yourself kindly arrived with diversity and saved us from ourselves. No, we built a wonderful country that your ancestors could not have been. That is why people like you come here. And the more you come in larger numbers, you will change the country my ancestors built into something else. And it is completely normal for me to wish to oppose that.
Mr. Taylor, I've taken enough of your time.
That's a great clip.
Well,
I think we've all used that one. Yeah.
Well, yes, she seems to have had no reply to that, and I think there really is no reply to it. But
the military term for that is pop smoke. That is when your smoke grenades go off and we vanish into the forest tree line because we're being defeated soundly. Time to leave, time to run away. Yeah.
Well, I am old-fashioned. I'm of the generation that actually read a lot of books. I don't read as many as I used to. I'm sort of moving off into this short attention span stuff. You read a few articles on the internet and you think you know something. Well, you don't know as much as you would know if you read a book. These things are time consuming, but you are absolutely 100% correct. I tend to make longer things that people's eyes are going to glaze over. Also, my current video setup is really very crude. I've got this white background. Somebody says, Taylor, your videos look like a hostage video. There's a certain truth to that. This sort of stark, and no, I need to improve the whole situation. And I take your advice. I do need to make shorter videos. My friend Ramsey Paul, I don't know if you ever watch his stuff. He's got a great sense of humor. He used to say, if 5 minutes is enough for sex, 5 minutes is enough for a video. But
it's not enough for it, though. It's
but he's an older guy. But anyway, it's got to be short and sweet. You're absolutely 100% correct, and I appreciate the point you're making. Some of these things can be encapsulated in almost an aphoristic sort of way. The other complaint that people have is that they say, well, Taylor, you're so much livelier when you're actually being interviewed. You sit there and you stare at the camera and you drone on about this and that. You need to kind of perk up, be a different kind of a guy. So we all have our different ways of doing things, and even old dogs like me can try to learn new tricks.
I think it's definitely possible. If you would like any help on the matter, or maybe a little editing for the videos or something to put out, reach out. We'd be more than happy to help.
Well, that's very kind of you. That's very kind of you. And really, I beg your pardon. Yes.
I had one last very
Yes.
somewhat quick question, but I'll let you finish that thought if there was something else there.
No. Please speak.
I was just curious because I'm not going to, I'm not, okay, guess what your age is. I'm not sure, but you are actually somewhat, I don't know what's the right word, notorious or for being in very good shape at your age. I was curious as to like, what do you do? What does your week look like? Do you go to the gym? Do you run often? Like, how do you, because I've been trying to push this on like, it should be like a foundational part of your day, of your week. Like it's a major part just to be a healthy man or person. Really, you need to move your body and be strong and be as healthy as you can to maximize your head, your heart, everything. Is like to me, your mind, body, and spirit is like the trifecta of all things. And if one is sick and weak, the rest will suffer. So
I agree 100%. And I was really very fortunate. When I was 12 years old, I had a gym teacher, and he had this slogan: exercise adds years to your life and life to your years. And I chose to believe it.
That's true.
And I'm one of these lucky guys who actually likes to exercise. And I have two different routines. One is a strength routine. One is an endurance routine. And I do have an elliptical machine that I own. That's an expensive piece of equipment. But I don't like to get in a car, for heaven's sake, and drive to someplace to be fit. Yeah. I bicycle when I can, but I like to do as much exercise as possible at home. So I've got a few weights. I've got a chin-up bar. And so I exercise at home at least 3, 4, 5, sometimes 7 days a week. I'm addicted to it. And I think that is a very, very important thing. And that, to me, that's another thing. Very inspiring about you young guys who are coming into the movement, if I dare call it a movement, very fitness-oriented, very health-oriented. Don't drink to excess. Some people don't drink at all. None of these crazy drugs people put in their system the way we did in my hippie youth. That stuff is terrible. Absolutely terrible. So no, I am a great believer in physical fitness, and I want to die in the waiting room.
Yeah. I'll leave with that. It was a quote. The Simpsons had a good 10 years where it was one of the best shows on television. And then there was the bus driver Otto. He's drowning in the sea, and he's at least I'll leave a beautiful corpse. It's a great way to go out, At least I will look great when I'm dead at whatever age,
That's right. Nothing wrong with that. Anyway,
something at the funeral. You don't want to be embarrassing, It's got to look good.
If there's going to be an open casket, I want to be well dressed and look okay. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm very much obliged. It's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you all for all that you do. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, sir. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Likewise. Cheers. Thank you.
We'll end that on that note.